Dear cynics and romantics, my name is Monice, and you are listening to the Romantic Cynic podcast. On today's episode, I've been really thinking about setting healthy boundaries in a relationship. I think this is something that we probably don't do early on when we first start dating someone, and I feel that it is important to set boundaries relatively early for the health of you and for the safety of both people in the relationship. So I hope you join me on today's episode where we might mix in some laughter, maybe some tears, romance, and of course, some cynicism. Welcome to episode 37. I've been thinking a lot about setting boundaries in a romantic relationship. And I think that this is something that should be important to you as an individual when entering a new relationship or even being in a current relationship. Now, the one thing to think about is the longer you've been in your current relationship, although it's still important to share your boundaries, it could be somewhat difficult to really be respectful of each other's boundaries, especially because certain things have taken place over the years. Maybe there's already some resentment in the relationship because boundaries weren't set early on. Healthy boundaries define what is appropriate behavior in our relationships. Behavior that will keep both parties safe physically, mentally, and emotionally. And setting healthy boundaries is crucial for self-care of you and positive, healthy relationships. I know for me, in both my first two serious relationships, I didn't set boundaries because one, I was young and there was some naivety from my part, thinking that the way I treated someone, they would respect that and would treat me the same way, to do unto others as you want others to do unto you. And the thing is, when it comes to other people, we as women, we sometimes make the assumption that if you're in a heterosexual relationship or even, a homosexual relationship, we sometimes automatically think that the other person can read our minds, that the person should just know. And that is not the case. Sometimes we have to lay everything out in black and white and let our partners know what we are comfortable with and what we are not comfortable with. And I think another big thing to also remember is that it is always okay to say no. If you have someone that does not listen to the word no, or they try to convince you otherwise, that is a really, really big red flag. And it's something that you should really look out for and watch for, especially when it comes to your own personal space, maybe financial boundaries, maybe sexual boundaries, things like that. We have to remember that it is always important for us to say no if we feel uncomfortable with it. So there is a quote I read. It says, this was from a book called Set Boundaries and Find Peace. And the quote in the book was, "A boundary is a limit or edge that defines you as separate from others." So what that means, if you look at it from a very physical point of view, our skin is an obvious boundary for us, but there could be interpersonal boundaries that we have as well. A big one for me, and I don't know if other people feel the same way, is I have this personal space bubble, have a bubble around me that I don't want others to to invade unless I give them permission. And I think that's a big part of it. Is like we have to be able to give people permission to be in our space. So a big one for me, just to kind of give you a silly example, it's not really a silly example to me, but I just can feel when someone's invading my personal spaces. I can be at like a grocery store, checking out, and I can feel when someone gets a little bit too close to me. So what I do is I usually angle my body, and then I will kind of stand with my feet wide apart just so I can create some distance for myself. And, there's times where if the person is a little bit too close to me, I'll feel comfortable enough to like, you're in my space. Could you please like step back just a step or two. Be kind as you can be. Now, the problem sometimes is that people can get so defensive really quickly. And that actually does come into play when it comes to setting boundaries. Now, if you have someone that wants to convince you otherwise of a certain boundary that you laid out, or they want to be very defensive very quickly, it shows that, one, they don't respect you. And some people are just confrontational because they are hearing the word, even though you didn't say the word no, they're hearing it. So therefore, they may retaliate in a way that makes you uncomfortable. If you don't understand, or if you don't know what your boundaries are, which is completely understandable, the best indication of a boundary being crossed for you is how you feel. Like, what is your gut making you feel? What are your emotions telling you? Are you uncomfortable? Is it making you hesitant? Is it making your heart rate increase? Like certain body physiological responses will be a big indication if someone is invading a boundary or someone is not respecting a boundary for you. And it's really important that you pay attention to those things, because what could potentially happen, and I can speak from personal experience, in my previous relationship, there is an incident, or a repeated incident, that my now ex-husband wanted me to do, and I would repeatedly say no. And the thing is, when someone wants to control you, when someone wants you to not have any boundaries because they feel like they have a claim on you as a person, they will make you feel guilty. They will make you feel ashamed. They will make you feel as if they will take their love away. They will make you feel as if they will abandon you if you don't do what they say. And the worst part about all that, it starts crossing your boundaries. You all of a sudden will probably never be comfortable with what a partner's asking, especially if it's an unhealthy relationship. You will never be comfortable, because what ends up happening is you will end up feeling shame, and you will end up feeling disgusted with yourself. And that is not a mentally healthy place that you should never, ever be in, especially with your partner, especially in an intimate relationship. The best thing you can do is a couple things in those circumstances is, one, say no. Two, communicate effectively and make I statements. I feel uncomfortable doing this, and because of. So you want to be able to be very clear on your boundaries. Set them specifically, and don't ever allow that person to disrespect the boundary that you created, no matter who that person is. We tend to, some of us, I know I can speak for myself, where we tend to somewhat be a people pleaser for a variety of reasons. And at times we allow people to cross our boundaries. And the thing is, we have to be comfortable with saying no. We have to be comfortable disappointing others. How the other person feels because you set a boundary and you said no, how they feel is not your responsibility. How they feel, you should not feel guilty of, because again, this is about your self-care as a person. This is about your mental well-being. This is about your emotional state of being comfortable and loving who you are and just self-caring for yourself. So, if you are in a relationship, there are a few things that I would make suggestions on, some steps that you can take to set some boundaries for yourself. So one of the big ones is kind of figuring out, or at least defining, your own personal boundaries in a relationship. And they don't have to necessarily be an entire list of all your boundaries. You might not know of some of these boundaries until they pop up in situations that are presented to you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to just jump all in and have the person make you feel pressure to do that. It's okay to kind of like take a moment and say, hey, I just need a little bit of space. I need to think about this. And then let me come back and we can have a full conversation around it. So, set some boundaries for yourself, whatever that could be. It could be, emotional. It could be financial. It could be any other boundary that you can think of as far as, what your boundaries are going to be. And the next step, so once you kind of figure out what your boundaries are, and just to have a few of them, especially when you're kind of dating, maybe first start dating, have some boundaries for yourself. The next step you can do is be clear and as straightforward as possible. And try to do it in a way that you don't raise your voice to the person, because once you kind of start raising your voice, sometimes the other person might feel the need to defend themselves, to become defensive. And once someone becomes defensive and starts arguing, the other person stops listening. And so when that happens, you really can't continue the conversation, but be as clear and as straightforward as possible. The next step is state your need or request directly in terms of what you'd like rather than what you don't want or like. And I think that's important because we don't always want to like start something off with a negative. Now, negative moments will pop up again once they present themselves. You might not actually think of what they are in that moment, but always try to set your boundaries in what things you would like to do. And again, that could be a variety of things. It could be social media is actually a big one. If you feel uncomfortable with your partner maybe posting pictures of you and of you as a couple online, let your partner know. And it's always important to tell them why behind it, because once you kind of tell them the why behind it, they'll be more apt to be respectful. They're more apt to like, okay, I understand why you don't want me to post these, post pictures of us online, and I can respect that. A big one is like, not liking attractive people's posts on Instagram. Another boundary could be, I'm not comfortable, connecting with people, with someone I'm dating, to connect with someone through direct messaging while I'm in a relationship with them. It could be a variety of different boundaries. And I know social media always pops up in a lot of relationships, especially when it comes to infidelity or cheating. So, being able to set those boundaries up front is going to be important. The next one is accept any discomfort that arises as a result, whether it's guilt, shame, or remorse. I think the third step is probably the most important of, the steps to take, because the worst thing that you can do is compromise your boundaries, because what ends up happening is you will just feel worse. Your emotional well-being should be very important to you and important to your partner. I know in some relationships, and again, I can speak for myself, where there was this sense of my partner, especially in my marriage, with my ex-husband, I felt as if he made me sometimes feel as if I was his property, in terms of he can do, say, and act however he thought appropriate, because I wasn't his equal in that relationship. And there were times I felt so guilty of saying no to certain circumstances. He always made me feel guilt because there was things I wouldn't do. And the worst part is I would allow him to talk me into doing those things, even though I was so uncomfortable. And at the end, I felt shame. That's the big part. It's like when you feel shame in a relationship because someone disrespected your boundary, it not only is it a huge red flag, but it's going to cause emotional distress within you. And I know I can speak again for myself that we are all allowed to feel peace in our relationship. We should all be allowed, and this is a big one for me, we should all be allowed to feel safe in a relationship. We should feel physically safe, mentally safe, and emotionally safe in any romantic relationship that we are involved in. And if any one of those three, or a combination, or all three of those are not being met, or we feel guilty, or if we ever have shame in one or all three of those, we have to be strong to tell our other half no and the reasons why. And if they continue to act accordingly, no matter how much it hurts in the moment, we have to be willing to walk away from that relationship, because at the end of the day, if you don't, you will cause so much more stress for you as a person, which can ultimately affect your health. And self-care is a huge part of our health and a relationship self-care of ourself, in both from a personal standpoint and our relationship, is critically important. And it's even more important that we have a partner that supports us and that we respect their boundaries as well. So I hope you got some insight on this episode today about setting boundaries in your relationship. And here is a quote, because I like to end my podcast episodes on a quote now. This is written by Michelle Maros, and it says, "Setting boundaries is not about keeping people away. Rather, it is a powerful act of self-love." Thank you for listening, and as always, yours truly, the Romantic Cynic.